right, welcome to Black Man Speak. I'm your co-host J.R. Stewart.
And I am your co host, Tommy Duncan. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen.
Yes, welcome. And if it's Wednesday night at 8 p.m. time, we know what time that is.
Yes, it is. It is time for Black Men Speak, the most provocative and insightful podcast in America.
Yes, it is. Second to none. Um, let's give a big shout out to Liquid for providing our theme music, although the play was a little shaky today. And if you haven't already, please give us a big like to help us with the YouTube search algorithm. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so, and please share with others that we're on every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Trying to bring you the news and information that you need and solutions that Black folks need to get up out of this hole that we find ourselves in. So, Tom, what is our topic for tonight?
Well, Jimmy, this is going to be an interesting conversation, and I guess one that seems to never particularly end. We are referencing an article that's been out there for a little while, but it talks about progress or lack thereof for Africans in America since 1968, which is right around the time that the Kerner Commission report came out, which basically states that there's really been no progress in home ownership, unemployment rates, and incarceration. Incarceration is a whole different conversation since 1968, Jimmy. So, we have a strong lineup going into 2022, and we are about the uplift of our community, regardless of the politics and religion, Jimmy. So it is time to go.
Well, you know what, Tom? That is surprising that the Washington Post would actually publish such an article. Normally, you don't find left-leaning print magazines, newspapers, printing those type of stories. They normally bury those stories and hide them. So I'm surprised. So let's give credit to the Washington Post for actually having the courage to put the information out there. The next thing, Tom, it seems like we've been fooled into believing that we're making some progress. I mean, there are a few black billionaires and black millionaires, lots of black folks in the middle class, upper middle class, and it seems like we were thinking we've been led to believe that we're making some progress. For this article to point out that collectively that have made no progress since 1968. I mean, one is a shocking admission, but two, Tom, it also points out the urgency of what we've been saying on this show. We do not have time to sit here and play anymore. We don't have time to waste, with arguments and going back and forth over that with efforts that lead to nothing, or as we say it in Alpha Land, efforts that build bridges to nowhere.
Mhm.
So, we got to get our act together. We can't continue for the next 50 or 60 years for the next article to come out and say, well, blacks haven't made any progress in 100 years and over a century.
And the reference point, Jimmy, if we look at that, interestingly enough, 1968, this is a little bit over 100 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. And, as I was doing a little bit more research, there was another article that came out in I believe it was the 20s, that
Hmm.
kind of referenced some of the stuff 50 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. But we are literally looking at 150 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. And when you look at, not that we don't have more black folk who are getting degrees, high school diplomas and bachelor degrees, and not getting the paper. But when you come to what really matters in America, which is economy and controlling your own destiny, that is what we're talking about. Because let's be very clear, some of the wealthiest people in the world have no degree. And so I'm not saying do not get your paper. But when it comes right down to it, Jimmy, if you're going to compete and you talk about race and racism, it is literally a race for power. And a lot of that comes with economy and control over your destiny.
True. Very true, Tom. And that's what we're lacking. And that's where the black middle class is going to have to step up because wealthy black folks are not going to do it. They have no desire whatsoever on helping the collective black group come up. They seem to be more focused on holding on to whatever wealth they've been able to generate and enjoy themselves cars, mansion, women, bling, blah blah, until it's all gone. It seemed like, Tom, when our ancestors were able to scrape up a few dollars, it seemed like they went out and bought land with it. They expanded whatever land they had. They bought little things, but it seemed like they made more progress with fewer resources and less available to them than black people of today. It seems like we should be much further along, Tom. We should not have a 50-year period, more than 50 years actually. But we're talking about maybe 54 years now since 1968 with no progress, little to no
And when,
progress.
and when we say no progress, folks, that doesn't mean in terms of absolute dollar terms. We're talking about relative to the indexing of
Correct.
the market, so to speak. So, for instance, I mean, when you look at, for instance, the housing rates in 1968, that is black folks with home ownership, which is the primary
That's the
vehicle
American
that
dream,
most
Tom.
folks in America, that is the way the majority of people build their wealth. It is practically the same, less than 1% of a difference in home ownership between 1968, when that report came out, and today. I mean, regardless of all the educational attainment, all the degrees that have been confirmed, let's be very clear. It is about the same in terms of home ownership. That is the primary means of wealth. When you look at unemployment rate, there has been relatively little progress relative to the mainstream or white community.
Ours
Let's
is
be very
always
clear.
twice whatever the average is, Tom.
Exactly. When you look at unemployment, it is, Jimmy, systematic and structured. For instance, so when I went to Texas A&M, my alma mater, back in the 80s, and I was looking at, at that time you still had scholarships that could be set aside for African Americans who were attending the university. And then there was something they called the Hopwood case, University of Texas, which had nationwide implications that literally struck down a lot of scholarships that were available to African American students to attend public state universities, predominantly white, what some of us call PWIs. At that time, we were about 3% of the population at Texas A&M University, about somewhere between 35 to 40,000 people. Jimmy, in 2021, the university has grown to 60 something odd thousand students on their main flagship campus. And if I tell you that the African American student body is still around 2%, and this is somewhat 30 some odd years later after the late 80s, well, I guess knocking on 40s now, still about the same. And this is the other thing that we have to consider. During that period of time, the Latin American population at Texas A&M University is now 25%. One out of every four students is Latin America. 2 to 3% are African American. Asian population at Texas A&M University, 8%. So these things are not a coincidence. They are systematic and they are very structural. There are two sides to this conversation, Jimmy, but it's not by happenstance that we are where we are. And the question is, what do we do about it? And when I say we, I mean we.
Collectively, the black nation. Well,
Absolutely.
one of the things we have to do about it, Tom, is get serious about educating ourselves and generating wealth. And I'm going to say this today, I'm going to say it tomorrow, and I'm going to continue to say it because I've been saying it for a long time. We have to get out of the racism business. Fighting the racism war, that war's been won. If we're still fighting that battle, we're
Yeah,
wasting
when
our
you say
time.
one, what do you mean by it's been won?
It's been won. There's
By
no
who?
by black people, Tom. There's no one stopping. There are no laws stopping black folks from getting ahead. There's no one blocking the doors of universities. As far as admission or enrollment, there's there are no systems in place, government, educational, private industry, to keep blacks down. So if you had set aside scholarships 30, 40 years ago, 20 years ago, whatever the period was, and the population was 2 to 3%, and it's still 2 to 3% today without those, that lets you know that the set asides wasn't the issue. Because if it was the issue, we would have saw a reduction when it went away. You saw no reduction. It is still the same. So with that being said, if you have the capabilities, the ability, and the scholarly merit to get enrolled and matriculate at Texas A&M, which is not an easy school to get into now.
Correct.
Tom, now if it was some other school, you could make a case for it, but Texas A&M is not the easiest school in Texas to get into. So you need to be a serious scholar to make that happen. But it shows that we can make it happen, Tom, even without the set aside. Because it's still black kids are still getting into A&M about the same rate they were before, so that wasn't a factor. So when I say we've won the war on racism, no one wants to be called a racist today. There are white folks who will slap their kids before accepting that they're a racist. It's a bad word today, and anyone just to be accused of being a racist, you can lose your business, you can lose your job. I mean, there's this cancer culture out there that are attacking people. So, racism, that battle and changing the hearts and minds of people in America, that's been won. It's not like in the 50s and before when, when a lot of folks didn't care about racism. Now they do. They're very focused on it. So bringing attention to the nation, making the nation aware that racism existed, and that we need to try to do whatever we can to make up for past mistakes. Okay, that battle's been won. So we need to move forward now. Now it's not the time to be victims. Now it's the time to be victors. So all those kids who are still matriculating in A&M now without any quotas are set aside, you guys are heroes. You're doing the hard work necessary to get in there. What we need is more kids doing the same as the ones who are getting in now, in order so we can have even greater results.
This is the thing, though, Jimmy. At Texas A&M, when you look at the volume of students, it's
Hmm.
pretty flatlined. That's the difference. So it was 35,000 students. It's now 60 some odd thousand
You've
students.
doubled.
Now, no, it didn't double. It did not double because right now, at that time when I was in school, there were 800 African American students. Now there are maybe 1,200
Hmm.
students, and I don't even know if it's that much. And let's be very clear: there's a difference between 800 students at a population of 35,000 and 1,200, and it may be a little bit lower than that at 60 something odd thousand. So it's flatline. Every other demographic statistically has grown, but the African American community at Texas A&M. I won't sit on that too long,
Okay.
but this is the other thing. When you look at the difference between racism being one, there was a 14th Amendment after the Emancipation Proclamation,
Correct.
rights to citizenship. There was a 15th Amendment, voting rights. That does not mean that all freed Americans, African Americans in particular, had free and unfettered right to voting and or citizenship. In addition to that, if you look at incarceration statistics, when you look at housing, redlining is real. It still exists today. We had that conversation last year. We'll continue to have that conversation. Just because the laws are on the book doesn't mean that the enforcement is there. It's not changing people's minds. There's a difference between legalizing something and enforcing it.
Well, Tom, that is absolutely true. And so let's go back to the Constitution. So we amended the Constitution to end slavery, to grant citizenship, grant the right to vote, equal protection under the law. And so those became the foundation, but still there were states out there and there were political influencers. I call them the white liberals, been the most dangerous thing in America to black people, who fought to keep black people down. They still do, because they need somebody to be superior to. They are wired that way. They want to be superior to another group of people because that's how they feel good about themselves. So without somebody to feel superior to, they have no meaning in life. And what we have to do is just make sure that we don't fall victim to those policies and to those thinking the way we have. When I say the war on racism has been won, it's because you can truly go out there and make something of yourself if you're willing to work hard enough. I'm not going to say that it's easy. I'm not going to say that everyone's going to be in your favor and the doors are just going to open up for you to go from zero to success. That's not the way it works. But there is certainly not a great deal of blocks in your way as far as people being able to organize government resources and private industry to work against you the way that it was. So if you want to become a successful person, you have to roll your sleeve up and become successful. It means a lot of hard work. It means some dedication. It means some dumb luck along the way. But if you stop and give up because you buy into the belief that there's a racist force out there that's stopping you or holding you back, or every time you have a setback, you blame it on racism, I promise you and I guarantee you, you're not going to reach your goal in life.
I can't disagree with you that if you're blaming and you're pointing the finger, you're not doing something about it. Whether you're someone who is of the mindset that there are factors, institutional factors that have racist foundations in them, or whether you believe the exact opposite. It's not what you're believing one way or the other, but what you're doing about it. And I think
Correct,
that's the
because
conversation.
regardless of the situation, whether there is real or not, you still have to deal with it. You still have to
Correct.
overcome certain things, like for instance, in business formation, and we talk about this, and I still say, and I believe this to be true, that the SBA route, which some black businesses, some black owners have used to get funding for their startups, which is great for those who have been able to work the system to actually get ahead. But the vast majority of small business startups who go through SBA, go through the banking process, get turned down 3 times, go back to SBA, get some kind of award or guarantee from the SBA, which takes a little while, go back to the banks, get the money, only to default on the damn loan, and then start the process over again 3 or 4 years later. To me, that whole system exists to keep you locked into that cycle. Because somewhere along the line, banks have figured out how to gauge with some degree of accuracy who's going to repay a loan and who's not. They're the reason that the 20%, the 20/80 rule existed in banking is because people with a 20% stake in whatever they were doing had a little skin in the game, and that was just enough skin to get them to fight to repay the other 80%. But when you do away with the 20/80 rule, which we've done to try to encourage home ownership, and I'm not saying the intentions were poor or bad or malign in any way, but what I'm saying is that the more government gets involved to try to dictate the outcome of something, the worse it becomes. So you end up with a housing bubble as a result of people not being qualified for a lot of the homes that they were purchasing, not paying for, had no intention of repaying, which caused problems. So the best thing that we can do, Tom, in my opinion, is stop looking for government solutions to our problems. Our problems are about educating ourselves, accepting personal responsibility for what we're doing, hard work, sticking together, trusting each other, and going out and doing what we know we have to do like other people do. And if you do that, God, I promise you, government help, government money, government everything will come your way after you've been successful. The government
I would
has a
agree with
way
that.
of protecting success and wealth. If you
I
don't
would
have
agree.
success and wealth, yeah, it's always good. The government's not working in your favor. Trust me.
I would agree. You're talking the government, you're talking the banks, you're talking any other institution. It's going to lean towards those who have the wealth and the resources. For instance, Jimmy, you and I know, and you're an entrepreneur. The bank isn't willing to loan you any money. They're not willing to give you any money. But all of a sudden, you get so much money in the bank, your savings account, your checking account, and all of a sudden, this some dude that I've never heard of in my life starts calling, well, hello, Mr. Duncan, and how are you doing? And so when you start saving at a certain rate and they start saying, well, hey, we need to keep this money in the bank because, we may give him 1/10 of 1%, but we're able to loan this out at 8, 9, 10%, 3%, 4% if it's a house, and maybe somewhere between 8 to 16%, depending on their credit rating. If it's a card, they don't care about you unless you are wealthy. And that's because they can use your money to make more wealth for them. Now, I believe what we do need to start steering towards are the economic lessons and principles, because there's a certain degree to which I understand not waiting for government handouts. I can't disagree with you on that because I don't believe waiting on government handouts is going to be the answer. But there are some times when the federal government has gotten involved, because if we look at slavery, if we look at Jim Crow, if we look at all of these other institutional factors, without action of a federal government, we're still in the same place. But all that being said is there are certain economic, cultural habits that we have to discuss in order for us to take ownership of what we're going to do about eliminating this issue for the next 5 years, much less the next 50 years. And that comes to unemployment, that comes to home ownership, and that comes to incarceration. Because the reality of it is, Jimmy, I get it. We don't control the factors of power and wealth in the government. So if it's an institution that you do not control, good luck with that. Whether it's the government, whether it's most banking institutions, which we have very few that are run and operated by folk who look like us, and or education institutions, with the exception of those HBCUs that we still have some control over.
Well, the HBCUs, Tom, which are heavily funded by the federal government. I mean, our
Mhm.
current administration now is trying to suck $30 billion of funding away from these schools um, over a 10-year period as they increase spending by $5 trillion. That makes no sense to me, other than this is an effort to reduce the number of black graduates, because over half black graduates in America still come from the about 100, a little over 100 HBCUs versus the 3,000 plus white universities. And so taking money away from them is not helping at all. And if you look at other things, like for instance, this is knowledge that I just became aware of only because I'm getting into the to the home business. The government incentivizes suburban development. You know, if you want to go build, two or three hundred homes out in the suburbs, there's plenty of cheap money for you. There's tax credits available to those municipalities that get that woo these developers in. There's all kind of almost free money. We're talking 0.025 interest loans made to these developers. But go into the inner city and try to do anything. There is nothing available to you. The rules and regulations are stacked, one, against rehabbing and redeveloping and revitalizing the inner city where most of the brown and black people live. So, Tom, we have to look at the fact that even when there are government policies out there, we can say those are racist policies, but really what the government is just trying to do is control, the growth of population and control where people go and how they flow. And so people who are stuck in poor areas, they care nothing about getting you out of those poor areas. So you cannot look to government or government policies to do anything other than keep you poor and keep you in those areas. And no one's coming to rebuild your area, to rebuild your community and your city as the money flows and out to the suburbs and to other areas. So we got to be conscious of that, Tom. We can't put our eggs into the government basket anymore. I know we've done it for a very long time because it feels safe. They make us feel safe by lying to us constantly. But the reality is they are hoping and praying that we do absolutely nothing and we sit back and wait for them to solve the problems, knowing that those problems are never, ever going to be solved.
Well, then comes the conversation about, what is the strategy? I mean, what we cannot control on the most part is what the tax takes out of our earnings, so to speak, whether you're a W-2 person or whether you're a 1099 or somewhere in between. And for those who have good tax attorneys, they're obviously able to minimize what the government takes out, of the money that they do earn. But for those, who are contractors, entrepreneurs, 1099s, the beautiful thing about that is that you spend first and then they tax what is left concerning income. And that's something for another conversation. However, you and I have had this conversation multiple times. We had an economy after desegregation in the mid-'60s. We pretty much lost that economy. And if we are listening to what some of these folks are saying, there's been relatively no progress. Now, when we have built economies, we had this conversation in December of 2021. We talked about the Greenwoods of the world. We talked about the Rosewoods of the world. And when we have built those economies, they have been destroyed through violence. While the government was looking the other way, while there were some groups of people, jealousy or for whatever reason, did not want to see our communities grow and thrive. So one, we have to redirect our habits. We have to redirect how we are spending our money, and we have to redirect certain cultural norms, but we have to be able to protect and defend what we build.
Well,
That's the
Tom,
challenge.
okay, so some of this just comes down to some common sense and a desire to do things differently. For example, even if you're poor, um, my sister, who's been legally poor probably all of her adult life, at one point she had 5 children. And back when the earned income credit was 1750 a child, sometimes 2,000, depending on what administration. I think now it's about 3,000 per child. If she had her 5 children now, a person who pays nothing into the system, getting $15,000 out of the system, to me is a huge windfall. But now, just imagine you take Chick-fil-A. A Chick-fil-A franchise costs you $10,000 to buy one, to buy a franchise license. It costs you about $60,000 in equipment, and you still got to go out and secure a location. But if you do so, if you can somehow find a place to lease, come up with $70,000 to get started, Chick-fil-A, the average one makes over $2 million a year.
They
And
print
so,
money.
huh?
Jimmy, they print money.
They print it. That's correct.
I have never been to a Chick-fil-A that did not have a long line with kids
Thank
outside
you.
taking orders.
So, Tom, why aren't there any Chick-fil-A's in the inner city poor areas when you have mothers sitting on $3,000 per child? There's a reason why used car junk sale of cars go up between January and April, because that's when everybody's getting their money, getting loans against their money, and buying cars. What's wrong with 10 of these women from church coming together who have multiple children and saying, hey, let's pool our resources together and let's buy a Chick-fil-A license in our franchise?
This is the difference. There's a difference between having that income and having wealth. Otherwise, what they call, I forgot what they call it, the 3 C's or the 5 C's or whatever, the bank uses to determine your credit worthiness in order to
But see,
get a loan.
but I'm not talking about a loan, though, Tom. I'm talking about 10 of these women who have 3 to 5 children who are looking
Mhm.
at ten to $15,000 in earned income credit money coming to them from the IRS. 10 of them
Mhm.
getting together and raising $100 to $150,000 just on their earned income credit money. No
Well,
banks.
Jimmy, gotcha. They have to, one, not spend the money that they're getting, and they, number two, have to want to do that,
Okay,
which means they
so
would have to, which means they would have to sacrifice, which means delayed
1 year,
gratification.
Tom. We're talking one
Delayed
year of
gratification.
sacrifice. Taking your
Mhm.
earned income credit money, 1 year of it, and all the women across America who get a check from the government, y'all come together in groups where y'all can trust each other and plan to do something. You can easily raise $100,000+. And like I said, Chick-fil-A is one of the cheapest franchises to buy into. That's going to give you maximum buck for your return. And
But
if you
Jimmy,
can't give up 1 year of money, government money, and this is not even talking about your money that you worked and saved for. We're talking about free money coming to you simply for having children.
I
Then,
understand, Jimmy, but they have to not spend that money. Now, we've talked about this, Jimmy. When you look at the number of hours that the average household spends watching
I
television
know.
in America, which drives the psychology of consumer spending. And when you look at the amount of money that is spent in Black households on consumer products, primarily beauty, hair care, let's be very clear. And I ain't talking about everybody, sisters, so don't get upset with me. But when you look at the amount of money that I know some sisters spend on getting their hair done every couple of weeks, or getting their nails and or their feet done. Or let's go to the other side of the cage
Multi-billion
equation,
dollar
Jimmy. If
business
Jimmy,
that we don't
let's,
control.
I'm an equal opportunity conversationalist here. Or the amount of money that brothers are spending on smokes or alcohol
Yes,
or strip clubs or wherever it is they spend their pleasure money. It's the same thing, just a different type of vice, Jimmy. You cannot save up that kind of money when you cannot delay or defer gratification. Now,
that's
there are a
correct.
few people that will do this, but this is the other Jimmy. The other thing, Jimmy. Chick-fil-A is very, very persnickety in terms of where they will put a Chick-fil-A. They ain't gonna just let you put a Chick-fil-A over in Bonton or South Dallas in certain areas. They are very,
They
very
are,
particular
Tom, but
about their brand.
they would if you want to. If you had the money, you had a location, maybe on MLK somewhere, high traffic. They may not want to, but they certainly don't want to be charged with redlining or racism. So ultimately, they would let you operate there. They may not like it, but they would.
Jimmy, they ultimately have control over that because they have power over who they're going to franchise or award a franchise to. Very similar to redlining, when banks will determine who they will give money to and where when it comes to the housing market. Now, this is the other side of the equation. And I say this to my mom, and they laugh about it, but it's very true. We've been cooking for hundreds of years in this country. Other folk only been cooking for about 60 years. We got the best cooking in the country, if not the world. You can't tell me that we cannot create a franchise of our own, whether you're talking about a Williams Chicken. I'm not saying go get a Williams Chicken or a JJ's or a Harold's, that is putting money into your community. There is a great deal more risk because you don't have the branding, you don't have the legacy. But Jimmy, in order for us to control our destiny, we have to build and maintain our own institutions and be disciplined enough to support our own first, like every other group of people does. Jimmy, I travel quite a bit. I'm in Atlanta right now, but I've gone to small towns with 3,000 or 4,000 people, and I can guarantee you one thing: in every one of those little small towns, I can find a Mexican food restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
I can find a Chinese food restaurant. I can find a donut shop. In a lot of cases, I can find a cleaners owned by Latin Americans, owned by Asian Americans, and oh, we forgot about the gas stations owned by Indians.
Mm-hmm.
I ain't mad at them at all doing what you need to do, but that requires a commitment, a sacrifice, delayed gratification, and doing business and making sure that you keep your own in business. That is an inalienable right that every other group of people has exercised, and we have to focus on if we're going to end these statistics, in my opinion.
No, Tom, you are correct, Tom, and that's going to require a total realignment of our thinking. And I think there's some comments on the chat line which we need to get to here soon. But one of the comments about sacrifice, which is true, we have to be willing to sacrifice a few things, Tom, in order to get ahead. On top of that, we have to get back to being conscious about the collective we, not just me, you, and a few friends and family. There's always a bigger picture that we used to be focused on many years ago, which we don't focus on anymore. We used to be concerned about embarrassing our friends and our family and our community and our neighborhood and our church and collectively as black people. We don't seem to have that concern anymore. So until we get back to having some responsibility for our fellow brethren and sisters, until we accept some personal responsibility for our condition, then things are not going to change. I think if we start coming together with a focus that we're going to turn this around, and we can turn it around, trust me. If you take a nation like Japan, who was thoroughly defeated after World War II, torn apart. Now, I'm sure they had some capital investment to come in from the rebuilding efforts of the Sherman Plan, them and the Europeans, but for the most part, what they could not achieve militarily, they were able to achieve economically. And so that's what we have to turn our focus to. And when I say stop focusing on racism, because there's no money other than for a few race hustlers in the racism business, let's turn our efforts on wealth development. And there we can win that battle. If you look at the Muslims up in the Detroit area, who were a very tight knit community, and after 9/11, they were probably more distrusted and hated more than black folks in America.
Yes.
But somehow they still found a way to stick together, to come together, and for the portion of Detroit, we used to be black, that a lot of them moved into and took over, they are thriving, Tom. They do extremely well. And there's no reason we can't do the same thing. If you look at the Asian community here in the DFW area, when they first moved into Plano back in 1990, I remember one Asian bank that opened up there who had a loan repair rate of over 99%. Other banks moved into the area to start making Asian loans so they could tap into it. But now look at the success that the Asian community enjoys in the Plano area. It's enormous. And so they were able to do this in 1 or 2 generations, Tom, because they were focused on something. We're still struggling trying to get a black bank to survive in the DFW area.
Yeah, Jimmy, I don't believe we have one in the DFW area, do we?
We don't.
I know there's one in Houston. There's one in
Houston.
Think about this, Jimmy. Okay, there are 29 million people in the state of Texas. I don't know the exact figures, but I know in our conversations with Brother O'Neill, Charles O'Neill, he said that the state of Texas has the largest black population in the United States. That is including New York, that is including California, that is including Florida.
That's
Texas
correct.
now has the largest black population. And quietly, it's been there for some years. The fact that there is one, maybe two banks, black-owned, black-operated banks in Texas is outright lunacy. And so this is a conversation that we have to have on culture. This is a conversation that we have to have regarding some very frank and uncomfortable decisions in terms of where we're going to go, so that when our children's children are around, they will have a different conversation than what we are having today. Because one thing that I would say about our grandparents and great grandparents, they were living a life where they had very few freedoms compared to the white population in America. So they knew that what they were doing and what they were surviving for, they would likely not see the benefits. But number one, they survived. Number two,
Yeah.
they sacrificed. Number three, they did what they had to do under, oh my gosh, inscrutable circumstances, living with the fear that every day that not only the KKK, but the police department or the sheriff's office could come in, drag you out, and hang you for no good reason other than you're trying to start a business. You're what they call one of those uppity N words.
Right. You're
And
uppity.
they wanted to drive you out of town. Vis-a-vis the autobiography of Malcolm X. His father was lynched because he believed in the teachings of Marcus Garvey. Up, you nation, you can do what you will. And so now it's not done as much with the burning cross or in the tree, but it's done with public lynchings, is what
And,
I would call
and so let me say this, Tom, just to make sure that people don't misconstrue my earlier statement. When I say don't wait on government to save you, I really mean that. But that doesn't mean that government shouldn't be fair to all people. And you're right, Tom. Texas has the largest black population in America of all states. We also have the largest number of black businesses throughout America. And when you talk to
it. But,
Charles,
but
who's
we but we wouldn't know.
right, you wouldn't know
Yeah,
by looking around. But here's
right.
the other thing: Charles and I have been having this conversation for years because he's down in Austin. He's the lobbying branch arm for the Black Chamber here in Texas. Um, and I remember over 10 years ago, Charles and I had the conversation, and I believe the procurement budget at that time for that was being directed at black businesses was about 1.75%. Excuse me. 1.75% of the entire operating procurement budget was going to. I'm sorry. Excuse me.
Bless you.
Sorry about that. Excuse me. And now, Tom, that 1.75%, which was dismal, considering we make 14% of the state population, we pay into that budget, and only and from I mean the state has to spend the money with businesses for goods and services, and for us to be at 1.75% is a dismal testimony. And Tom, that was over 10 years ago. And today, the last time he was on our show, it is now less than 1%. So we hadn't made progress in the procurement process here in Texas. Once again, we've stepped backwards. So there's nothing wrong with fighting to say this should be this should be equalized a little bit better than what it is. With this many black businesses in Texas, it should not be that difficult for the state of Texas to find some black businesses to do business with. So certainly fight on that behalf to make sure that state and federal government are fair when it comes to their allocation of resources. But as far as putting policies together to save us, that's not going to happen. So we're really going to have to save ourselves.
Now that we definitely converge on that, Jimmy, and we have about 20 minutes left. So, we're going to start talking about the action items and to-dos in the last one third of this show, because of course, we do want to talk about and unpack what's happening within our community right now, but we also want to, provide some constructive solutions that we can do at an individual level and a collective level. For instance, first and foremost, one of the statistics that we were looking up, which again has not changed in 50 years, is home ownership.
Right.
That is the number one producer of wealth in America for the average American family. I believe somewhere around 40% of African Americans own their own home. It's about 70 something percent, in white America, so to speak. But by far and large, the number one generator of wealth is home ownership that builds equity when you're in your family. The other thing, obviously, inheritance. And this is a conversation that
Well, Tom, before you move on to inheritance, just to step back to housing for a quick second.
yes, sir.
Um, as far as federally chartered banks are concerned, blacks represent 25% of the foreclosures. When
Okay.
you factor in credit unions and I'm sorry, I don't know why my nose is okay. When you factor in private institutions, private lenders, and credit unions, then that rate goes up to 35% of foreclosures. So, with that, I mean, 40% of us own homes, and but almost 25 to 35% of all the foreclosures in America are black. So I just want to throw
Right.
that in. So go
Access
ahead.
to resources, and access to information, and that, of course, is one of the reasons why we're here. I mean, it is no accident, in my opinion, that the average black income is 80 cents on the dollar of the average white income in America. It is no coincidence, in my opinion, that the average black household family is operating at about 62 to 64% of the average white household. It is access to resources, access to information, but more importantly, making decisions that are in your own collective interest. That is why, Jimmy, you make a very provocative statement in saying that, you know what, you can't count on wealthy black America to save black folks. And whether that is because they have no interest, whether that is because their wealth is truly controlled by mainstream America or white America or some other factors, if you look at the numbers, if you look at the disposable income, if you look at the interest, Jimmy, we're going to have to go back to the days, of the Madam C.J. Walkers that were
Madam
empowering,
C.J.
and there you
Walker,
go, who
first
were
millionaire, but Tom, she created other black millionaires.
that's the
She
key.
she and that is the key. So when you look at tech giants like Steve Jobs or Bill Gates, they may be billionaires, but they made so many other millionaires around them. Where are the black billionaires today making other millionaires around them? It doesn't really happen, Tom, and that's part of the difference today.
Well, it is somewhat scant. Obviously, there are folks who fortunately have been able to have been able to get there. But if you look at the statistics, and all of this information is coming from the Bureau of Labor Statistics,
Right.
I mean, the numbers are the numbers, and they're not skewing very well within our community. 90+% of the wealth in America is owned by a relatively large but a very small population relative of white America. When you're talking about the Jeff Bezoses, the Bill Gates,
Right.
the Warren Buffetts, and all of these folks, 90+% own practically everything. When you look at wealth in Black America, how much wealth we own collectively, we're talking about maybe 2%, 1 to 2%. If we look at the economy in Black America, 1%, we control about 1% of the economy. But Jimmy, that's staggering when you say that we contribute to about 1% of the overall wealth of this country, but we contribute 30% of the spending. What is wrong with that picture?
We're consumers rather than wealth developers. So one of the things, Tom, I mean, I study wealthy people. I mean, Elon Musk is now on my radar. So I look at every speech he's ever given, things he's written, things that have been written about him. And there seem to be patterns that among super wealthy people. They understand the concept, Tom, that you don't trade today's good money for things that are going to be worth less or worthless tomorrow. And we do that on a daily basis, Tom. We go buy the name brand everything and think that that's somehow of value because we believe it gives us some kind of statue to say that you have designer shoes on or shirts or $600 $1,000 pair of tennis shoes, which is ridiculous to me for something that costs every bit of $5 to make. If you think the 15-cent cup of Starbucks coffee that they sell for $7 is a ripoff, well, try paying $1,000 for some sneakers that cost every bit of $3 to $5 to make, and that's even the shipping cost to get it over here, Tom. But we would do that thinking that us walking around with $1,000 pair of tennis makes us a big shot. It makes us something. Really, all it does is it makes you dumb. You've now given away $1,000 of dollars today for something that's worth $5 with no appreciation tomorrow. And as long as you keep doing that, you're going to forever be poor. You can't build wealth, Tom, with that equation. We are consumers. We're the consumer class in America. The best thing America can do when the economy is poor is to pump money into black people's hand because we're going to go out and spend it. Other people, when they hear bad news about the economy, they stop spending. They start saving. They start, hedging for tomorrow. But if we did the same as other groups, then America would be in a depression every other election, versus being able to withstand depressions because you have a group of people called black folks who will continue to spend good times and bad.
Gotcha. So, one, I want to invite those who are listening right now to call in if you would like, or
Yes.
to use the chat line to ask any questions or bring your thoughts to the equation that we can discuss within the last 15 minutes as we kind of steer and make a detour to some of the solutions, what we have to do and what we must not do in order to change this narrative in terms of where we stand in America. And this is not just an American problem. This is a global problem, whether we're talking about the United States, whether we're talking about South America, Colombia, whether we are talking about the African continent. You have the white community controlling black wealth, and that has to stop. And in order for that to stop, we have to make different decisions.
And
And so,
Tom, they control it globally.
exactly. And
Uh,
so, as opposed to cars, which depreciate in value, and clothes, as opposed to rims, which depreciate in value, clothes. I mean, how many clothes can you have? But, there are, I guess if you got the money, spend it. But man, spending $1,000 on a purse. I mean, there are purses out there that cost 1,000 some odd dollars.
Shoes.
Yes, sir.
Tony shoe. Who's it? Something shoe. The chew shoes. The wife and I were just talking about the last week. These
Right.
$1,500 to $5,000 shoes and women's shoes, Tom, are just not put together very well. So there's no way that that shoe could be worth anything of any value once you put your foot in it and wear it.
Mhm. Now,
What's the good news?
the good news, Jimmy, is that everything that we need to know, we knew over 100 years ago.
Yes,
Matter of
we
fact,
did.
we actually knew it while our great grandparents and great grandparents were still slaves. What is that? They knew the value of land. So when we talk about home ownership, basically what we're talking about is real estate. Whether you're talking about a single family home, whether you're talking about multi-family homes, whether you're talking about land, there is a finite amount of land on the globe and it is getting sucked up. And the unfortunate thing that I've seen is that a lot of the second and third generations don't understand the value of land, and so they are giving it away to other communities, which are literally voluntarily transferring wealth out of our communities into other communities because they don't want to keep up the house, they don't want to mow the yard, they don't want to do this and that and the other, and then they're living in an apartment. So Marcus Garvey talked about this. Malcolm X talked about this. All of the greats over 100 years ago, Jimmy, talked about this same thing. Land and business is very, very simple. So let's unpack this, Jimmy, and then we can wrap this up because we have
Okay.
about 10 minutes left.
Well, Tom, you're absolutely correct. Land ownership is something we have to get back, to doing. And for families that I run into this situation on a regular basis, daily, of having a piece of land that we're interested in purchasing and develop, and finding out that it's in great great grandmama's name who died many years ago, and there are all these heirs out here, people who have their hands in it. The property has never been adjudicated. It's never been determined who, or they haven't come together to try to do anything with it. In the end, someone comes along and offers them a few coins for it and take it right from out from under them, or they're fighting over the land. And the lawyers end up with it. So we need to really kind of get back to trying to buy a piece of America for us to actually own, and that is one of the reasons the new company that I'm starting. We're looking to change that. We're
Yes,
actually
tell us about that, Jimmy.
so it's called Affordable Community Developers. .com. You can go to the website. It's a very long name, but we call it ACD for short. But affordablecommunitydevelopers.com. You can go to our website. We're cranking up in 2022 this year. In time, we're going to go back into the inner city and we're going to rebuild. We want to encourage people who are sitting on these old houses that are falling apart. A lot of times they have a nice little a lot of land up under these houses. So tearing the house down and rebuilding is going to be cheaper and more affordable and more rewarding in the long run than trying to patch these things up and bring them up to code. And there are a lot of empty lots in the inner city. I mean, we ride around and we see them. If I go down to South Dallas, I mean, just about every corner, every street has two or three of them on there. Um, so we're going to look to redevelop those and make them available at a very affordable rate. Hence our name, Affordable Community Developers. Um, and for people who live in those areas, because Tom, everybody should have a decent home to stay in.
Correct.
You shouldn't have to live in a house that's falling apart around you. And like I said, some of those homes are too far gone to try to repair and fix. It doesn't even make sense. So and so for those empty lots, let's build on them. For people who want to buy and be able to afford a home, because the average home price in America now is over $400,000, and that's going up. The government is not incentivizing home development anymore. They're incentivizing apartment development. Multifamily dwellings is where the government is investing grants to developers to build because they want to warehouse people.
Free
Um,
money.
and they give it, yeah, the money is almost 0.25% interest time, which is nearly free. Um,
Yes.
for me to go get a construction loan to build a house, they would charge me 20% interest on the construction loan. But if I want to go build apartment complexes, I can get that money nearly free. So, but our goal is to get our people out of the apartments and get them into homes, home ownership. You need some space of your own, Tom. You need some land up under you that you can say, this little plot of land at least is mine. And that
Absolutely.
which encourage you to go out and work, keep your kids in school, keep everybody safe, and do the right thing and live the American dream. So
And
that's what
Jimmy,
we're focused on.
Jimmy, the beauty of what you're saying is that nobody cheats death.
Right.
Unfortunately, it's written in the book, and the primary reason why the white community has about on average 10 times more wealth, net worth, than the black community is the difference in the real estate gap between the
Correct.
black community and the white community. What does that look like? It's called a transfer of wealth. When grandmother, grandfather, pawpaw, meemaw has that little house over there, and you're thinking, oh, this little rinky dink thing. Look, there are some places that you would think would be worth a little or nothing and worth a couple of $100,000 in the middle of the hood. And so, again, turn the TV off, invest in some books. It don't cost a lot of money to learn anything. Frederick Douglass was a slave. He was self-taught,
Self
became one of the
taught.
most powerful men in the world. Malcolm X,
Self taught.
he was there you go, self-taught, functioning little, had the brain of an attorney. God forbid he would have lived longer. And at the end of the day, investing in real estate, starting with buying, or even sweeter, Jimmy, multifamily housing that you can live in. Why? Because it is cheaper if you get a multifamily home that you can live in. It may be a little bit less convenient because you got other folks on the other side, whether it's a duplex or fourplex or something like that. But when you look at the amount of money that you have to put in into a small commercial property compared to a single family home, therein makes the difference. And then once you start putting in so much equity into that, you can use some of the streams of income from there in order to get your own home if you really want to. Next thing, Jimmy, we've got to save. We spend more money than
Yes.
any other demographic in this country on stuff we don't need and or depreciates in value. And so first you save, and then you save enough so that you can invest, whether that's in real estate or whether that is in the equity markets or whether you're going to start your own business. Now, starting your own business, as we've discussed, is not for the faint of heart. You need mentors. You need a lot of thick skin in order to deal with that, because most people who are wildly successful, many of them we know, they their first, second, third, fourth, fifth business was not wildly successful.
That's correct.
So you have to continue to understand that it may take you several years, with the exception of some miracle, in order for you to make it right. But once you hit that lottery, Jimmy, everything else is, watered downhill, Jimmy. So real estate, saving until you can invest, starting your own business, and then on a collective level, Jimmy, we talked about this when we had Mr. Hodges, Ray Hodges, on here, creating economic collectives. So maybe if we don't even have the money individually in order to make investments in
Oh
real
no,
estate,
Tom, coming together
or
is key.
exactly
Yes,
investment
pooling your
in real estate.
resources.
Exactly. We do a bunch of convention doing, Jimmy. I don't remember the last time, if ever, I was in a black owned hotel, but we do a bunch of conventioning. Now, one thing that Charles said a long time ago, we know how to raise money. How do we know that? It's called the black church. We got more black
Yes.
churches. We have more churches per capita than any other group in the
Any
nation.
other
So
group, Tom? Mega churches.
we know how to build facilities and churches as long as we got the fear of God and going to hell in front of us. But we've got to come to the realization that, what Malcolm X said, you're living in a hell in America. So you've got to understand that you've got to change the narrative, make some different decisions in order to get a different outcome.
Well, Tom, one of speaking on the convention, I remember 30 years ago, one of our frat brothers, Tony Brown, was making the circuit, speaking to everyone who would listen about the need for us to come together as organizations, forego our conventions for 1 year. And at that time, we were spending about $2 billion a year on conventions, Tom, and take half of that money that we would have spent on the conventions and buy four regional hotels. And then after that, we all book our conventions at those hotels. And without taking in one guest, that just on convention alone, I mean, you're looking at $2 billion of revenue for four hotels, $500 million a year in spending power. And Tom, that $2 billion that was 30 years ago is over $30 billion today, and we still don't have any black hotels to do a convention in. And this is what black organizations do. So when we talk about individuals coming together, Tom, it's not just each one of us individually. It's the organizations that we belong to, who also, like I said, with the conventions, we can make this happen, Tom. We could raise the money. Like I said, we may have to sacrifice putting off a convention for a year or two and raising enough money to do this. But hell, even if we only bought one hotel, we could all pile up that one hotel and book it up for years to come with just our own conventions. Create
Absolutely.
jobs for black people who want to get into the hotel industry, and then you use the revenue and the profits to open up build other hotels to do the same. But our mindset doesn't allow us to come together and do this because we're too distrustful of each other. So I would add trust to that list, Tom, as something that we have to take care of in the
Trust
very
is
near
probably,
future.
trust is probably one of the biggest factors that we deal with. How do we deal with the trust factor? Number one, I believe we have to turn the television off. We have to turn the radio off. It is probably the most destructive mass media in America is probably one of the, if not the most destructive force that is programming our subconscious to not trust in one another. It is the images, you look at the content in the music and what you call popular black music, rap, or whatever the case is. Gone are the days in R&B when we talked about love and family and courtship and everything. We have replaced that with, I don't even want to talk about it right now, but turning off the TV, getting into books, saving. So thank you, Brother Clayton. Where do we start? Number one, saving our money until we can invest. Number two, spending and tracking what we spend within our own community, our circles of influence. Every month, Jimmy, I track how much I spend with contractors and or other folks who look like me because it is important to me. I figure if I can do it as an individual, anybody can do it. And if you start out with just 5%, 10%, and are very intentional about where you're spending your money, whether it's a fuel station, whether it's a grocery station, whether it's your HVAC guy, whether it's your plumber, and you do not have to apologize for saying, you know what, I need to, find somebody who looks like someone in my community to do business with. That's the only way that we're going to build and sustain our economy. Save, do business with folks who look like your community, which is what everybody else does unapologetically, Jimmy. And then obviously we have to do and take some plays out of other folks' book or really out of our own playbook, because before the 60s, before desegregation, we were probably the most entrepreneurial of the entrepreneurs. We have to go back to that.
Yes, Tom. And then the other thing, Tom, to borrow from Tony Brown, you know, he understood that it was going to take a few black folks to come together and make it happen. And he said if we can get 1 or 2% of the black people to come together and do the right thing, then we could drag the other 98% with us. And so I still believe it to be true that it's going to take 1 to 2% of the black folks in America who want to do something collectively to show that it could be done. And once we demonstrate that it could be done, I think we'll drag the other 98% with us.
All right, Jimmy, I think that is I think I heard a bell there. So I think we are now at the top of
Yes.
the hour. So we're going to have to wrap up.
We didn't get any phone calls tonight, guys. We do have a phone line that you guys can call into any time and join the conversation. Now, don't let Tommy intimidate you guys. You don't have to be as
Me?
articulate as Tom. I know
No.
especially since he has his surgery now, his voice has got really
Yeah.
smooth, and so don't let that intimidate you guys. Anybody can call in with a comment. You don't have to sound as good as Tommy to call in.
Ha ha, Jimmy, Jimmy, very funny. But folks, we do appreciate you joining us tonight. We do appreciate you supporting us. We have a absolutely great lineup coming into 2022, and part of the conversation that we had tonight, is going to extend because we're going to have some real estate specialists on some of
Yes,
our future shows who can talk about, or who will be talking about, strategies and methodologies in order to build wealth in real estate. Jimmy and I both know them personally, including Jimmy and other folks as well. There's no one way to skin a cat. There's
that's
several
correct.
ways to invest in real estate. If we talk about entrepreneurship, Jimmy is an entrepreneur, so we're going to have Jimmy talk about entrepreneurship, other folks talk about entrepreneurship, and then just basic savings. Jimmy, it's very simple. Don't spend more than what you got.
That's correct. Well, Tom, as usual, we end with a prayer. So why don't you bring us home?
All right, dear Lord and graceful Father, we come before you this evening, thanking you for bringing us together again as a community. Father, we thank you for using us in your word, that we may be inspiring to someone, that we may share something that may be insightful, that may be useful, Father, that may glorify your name, understanding that you are the Alpha and the Omega, the true author of all power, all light in the universe. We ask you would continue to focus, Father, through us and to us, Father, that we as the original people will continue to grow and thrive. And Father, we ask that you would continue to protect our families throughout this country and throughout the world that are going through very significant health scares because of the pandemic, Father. We ask that you would continue to protect us, put your shroud of protection upon us, Father, and that you would continue to inspire us, Father, to be the answer to the questions that are needed through this platform on a week to week basis. And in your precious name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Okay.